The Viking Age, from raids to kingdoms. Does it come to your mind that those crazed seafaring warriors from up north weren't exactly always brutal raiders, but actually expert explorers, traders, and settlers? The impact that they had on Europe and further afield is undoubted, and their legacy remains of interest to this very day. The Viking Age is filled with spectacular transformations that range between the late 8th to mid-11th century. Thus, these Norsemen gradually transformed from the most vicious pillagers into founders of prosperous kingdoms. The Viking Age began with a bang. The first recorded raid by Vikings took place in 793 AD at the peaceful monastery of Lindisfarne in England and was brutally attacked. Now, the picture of longships cutting through the mist with their prows shaped like dragons, with warriors storming ashore with axes and swords, instilled terror into the hearts of people across Europe. But what if I told you that this was only the beginning of a much bigger and more complicated tale? One in which the Vikings didn't simply leave a trail of devastation in their wake, but also refashioned the political geography of the whole subcontinent. Let's set sail into the world of the Vikings and see how they went from raiders to rulers, from destroyers of kingdoms into founders of new ones. The Raids of the Vikings, Chaos in Times. Now, the scene is set for this tranquil morning off the coast of England. Fishermen mend their nets, monks chant in their abbeys, and farmers tend to their fields. Then the horizon fills with longships, their sails full of wind, in a race toward the shore. In minutes, complete chaos ensues as Viking warriors leaped off their vessels with swords flashing in the morning light. They set fire to buildings, they took treasure, and made specific captures. This was the terror of the raids from the Vikings, which had been instilled in Europe for many years. The Viking warriors had raided the British Isles right through the coasts of France and Spain, and even down to the Mediterranean with brutal efficiency. But for what reason did they start raiding in the first place? Now, there were a couple of reasons: overpopulation from their homelands, political instability, and the search for wealth and adventure. The Viking homeland was a rough place in which to live, with rocky soil and long winters. So farmers had to battle both, and these Norsemen looked outward. Since their longships had shallow drafts and sturdily mounted oars, they could sail well on both the open sea and in shallow rivers with equal ease, their captains sailing right into the hearts of coastal and inland settlements. The raids were often quick and brutal. Plunder was the major motive for the Vikings, who became notorious for their attacks on monasteries, since those had large amounts of gold, silver, and other treasures. Since monasteries were also by no means prepared to defend against any attack that didn't give warning, they were an easy target. But as time went on, with the raids becoming more frequent, something quite unexpected began to happen. The Vikings didn't just raid and then move on, they started to stay. Settlers, traders, and explorers. While raiding largely dominated the early years of the Viking Age, it wasn't long thereafter that the Vikings turned from raiders to settlers. One of the most well-known examples is in England, where the Vikings finally settled in their massive numbers and thus established what was known to be the Danelaw territory under Viking rule. The Danelaw reached over most of northern and eastern England, and the Vikings not only imposed their rule on that region, but they also married into it, farmed it, and traded in it. That's to say, they profoundly influenced the language, the law, and the culture of the area. Towns like York were established as major centers of Viking authority and trade. But it wasn't just within England that the Vikings settled. They founded the colonies in Iceland and Greenland and shortly colonized North America, nearly 500 years in advance of Columbus's first voyage. Just imagine those longships pressing through the icy waters of the North Atlantic, carrying iron-hard men and women to find new land. It was in Iceland that the Vikings found their new home and established one of the most extraordinary societies of their time. In fact, having a sophisticated system of government, the so-called Althing, constituted one of the oldest parliamentary institutions in all of the world. The Vikings were also fantastic traders. These were the traders who, from time to time, would cross the expanse of Europe as far east as the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Caliphate, returning with exotic goods like silk, spices, and metals. Routes of trade laid by them extend from the North Atlantic up to the Black Sea, making them one of the most connected people during that time. Many of the raids of the Vikings were probably aimed not only at treasure, but also at the establishment of new trade routes and securing vital means. Establishment of Viking kingdoms. As the Viking Age wore on, the Norsemen who once terrorized Europe began to build sturdy political structures. One of the more important changes that took place within Scandinavia itself was when powerful chieftains of the Vikings consolidated power and began to work toward constructing a durable kingdom. By the time of the late Viking Age, the kingdoms of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden emerged as major actors in European affairs. Probably the most famous king of the Vikings was King Harald Fairhair, who united all of Norway into a single rule in the late 9th century. The story of Harold is thus almost wholly a legend, a young king who conquered his rivals to bring the desperate Norse chieftains under one banner. He did so through a series of savage battles, using diplomacy where possible and force of arms where necessary. In uniting Norway, Harold established a dynasty that would endure for centuries. In Denmark, the first seeds of a united Danish kingdom were sown by King Gorm the Old and his son Harold Bluetooth. Of the two, Harold Bluetooth is barely less notable for his military campaigns, but also for converting Denmark to Christianity, a political move that integrated the kingdom into the broader Christian world of medieval Europe. Ironically enough, Harold's name survived to the present day in the form of modern technology. Bluetooth technology was named after him, reflecting his ability to unite people from various regions. Then there's Sweden. The kings like Olaf Skotkonung extended their influence on present-day Finland and the Baltic states. It was the Swedes, or Rus to the east, that were important in establishing the Kievan Rus, a coalition of Slavic and Viking people where modern Russia and Ukraine would emerge. From raiders to kings, look, this didn't happen overnight. But by the end of the Viking century, around the mid-11th century, Norsemen terrorizing Europe had grown into legitimate, powerful rulers with kingdoms to prove it. The age of the Viking raids were over, but the legacy had only begun. The end of the Viking Age and their lasting legacy. Now, conventionally, the Viking Age is said to have ended at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066, where the last great Viking king, Harald Hardrada, was defeated by an English army under King Harold Godwinson. Contested in a muddy field in northern England, this battle represents the end of Viking expansion and the beginning of a new era within European history. In a few weeks, Harold Godwinson would lie dead after the Battle of Hastings, and the Norman conquest of England would ensue. But Vikings would not disappear. The indelible mark that they left on the regions that they once raided endures to this very day. From the place names of England to the DNA of people across Europe, Norse mythology, with its sagas of the gods like Odin, Thor, and Loki, remain in our imaginations and inspire everything from books to movies. Perhaps most importantly, the Viking Age puts into perspective that history is never just about simple destruction. The Vikings, who started as raiders, went on to be settlers, traders, explorers, and kings. In the process, the legacy of the Vikings would stand out as one of resilience, adaptation, and transformation. What can be taken away from this age of the Viking? Well, it's a story of change, a story of how people could change and adapt to a different set of circumstances. But it wasn't just destruction that was left by the Vikings, but a trail of exploration, culture, and innovation. Think about it. Without the Vikings, our world today would be astoundingly unlike what it is. We likely wouldn't have the same language, borders, or traditions. So next time you hear the term Viking, don't think of just warriors and longships. Think about the crazy journey that they went on from raiding to then becoming kings. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you on our next adventure.